The audience inside the studio roared as the music faded. Jimmy Kimmel stood behind his desk, smiling wide, his tone full of charm, but his eyes sharp. Tonight's guest was different. This wasn't a movie star or a comedian. It was Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in U.S. history. And Jimmy was ready to turn the interview into a circus. "Ladies and gentlemen," he grinned, "please welcome someone from the White House. I hope she brought a map, because I have questions even Google can't answer." Laughter burst from the crowd as Karoline stepped onto the stage. Dressed in a bold red suit, her steps were calm, her posture strong. Her blonde hair was pulled back, and her eyes were like ice, focused, calm, dangerous. She shook Jimmy's hand. It was brief, professional. No smile, no warmth. She sat in the chair across from him, legs crossed neatly, gaze locked onto her host. The cheers grew quieter. Something in the air had changed. Jimmy leaned forward, still grinning. "Karoline, welcome to the show. What's it like being the face of the White House? Or should I say, the cleanup crew for the president's tweet? Storms?" The audience laughed again. But Karoline didn't. She smiled slightly, then spoke clearly. "I'm proud, Jimmy. Proud to speak for millions of Americans who care about this country. Not the ones sitting here twisting facts for laughs." There was a silence. Then a few people clapped. It wasn't loud, but it was unexpected. Jimmy blinked. His smile dipped for just a moment. "Oh, coming in strong. I like that," he said. "But let's be honest. Doesn't your job feel a little like doing stand-up comedy?" Karoline tilted her head. Her eyes didn't blink. "Comedy? No, I leave that to you," she replied. "I deal with truth, not stage tricks." The crowd responded. Louder applause now, mixed with surprised laughter. Even Jimmy looked taken aback. He raised his hand to calm the room. Cameras zoomed in on both faces. Jimmy's grin was still there, but his eyes looked more focused now. He tapped a pen against the desk, ready to move in for something bigger. "You say you speak for the people," Jimmy said. "But when gas prices are rising, inflation is up. People are struggling. How do you explain that? Is your administration just out of touch?" Now the laughter stopped. The audience waited, curious. Some leaned forward. This wasn't a joke anymore. Karoline sat up straighter, her voice steady. "Jimmy, rising prices are a global issue. Not just American," she said. "And while people like you point fingers on TV, we're making sure families aren't crushed under pressure." Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but Karoline continued, this time lowering her voice slightly. "And I'll tell you something you didn't mention, Jimmy. This morning I received a classified briefing. You made a joke earlier about foreign energy deals. You weren't supposed to know that, but you did." The entire studio froze. For a second, even the lights felt hotter. Jimmy blinked. "Excuse me?" Karoline didn't smile. "You said something earlier about our trade energy deal with a certain Eastern European country. That wasn't public yet. So either someone briefed you, or someone's leaking national security information to late-night TV." There was no laughter, only quiet. In the control room, a red warning light blinked. Producers stared at each other. In the corner, a lawyer stood up and whispered to an assistant. Jimmy cleared his throat, suddenly uneasy. "Well, I just read the news. I don't have any secret sources," he joked, but his voice lacked its usual energy. Karoline leaned forward now. "I think the American people deserve to know. Are our media outlets getting their news from journalists or from inside government? Leaks meant to push a political agenda?" Murmurs spread through the audience. A few people pulled out their phones. Twitter was already lighting up. Jimmy looked at the camera and tried to move on. "Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back." But Karoline didn't stop. She turned her head slightly toward the crowd and said, "Not all stories are jokes. Some are warnings." Then she looked back at Jimmy, her gaze steady. "And some people don't realize the stage they're standing on is actually a battlefield." The screen faded to commercial, but inside the control room, no one moved. The show had just crossed a line, and no one knew what would happen next. The commercial break felt like an eternity inside the control room. Red lights flashed. A tech director was speaking quickly into a headset. "We need legal, right now." She said something about classified intel on live television. That's not a joke. In a small soundproof office adjacent to the main studio, a senior network executive slammed a folder shut. His eyes were locked on a small screen where Karoline Leavitt's frozen image stared back at him. Her words echoed in his head. "You weren't supposed to know that." Across the country, millions of viewers were already flooding social media. Clips of Karoline's response were circulating at lightning speed, tagged with words like "Leakgate," "Who told Jimmy," and "Our Kimmel meltdown." Back in the studio, Jimmy Kimmel stood near the edge of the stage, rubbing his temples. "What the hell just happened?" he muttered. A producer ran up to him, whispering in a hushed, urgent tone. "You said something about an Eastern European gas trade. That info hasn't been made public. She just called you out. On live TV." Jimmy's face darkened. "I didn't. Someone from the Capitol press pool mentioned it to me last week. Off the record." The producer's eyes widened. "That's still classified." Meanwhile, Karoline sat quietly in her guest chair. Her phone buzzed silently in her pocket. She waited until no one was looking and slid it out beneath the table. The message read, "Zurich compromised. Flight manifest leaked. Get off the stage. Now." She froze. Zurich. She knew exactly what that meant. That morning, in a closed-door national security briefing, she had been handed a folder with a red band across the top. "Eyes only. NATO Protocol Series 7. Inside, among boring logistics and diplomatic arrangements, was something strange. A flight manifest for an unannounced summit in Zurich. Only a dozen names were listed, all government or military. One name in particular stood out. Julian Beckett. A name thought dead for 6 years. Julian had once been a CIA attaché in Ukraine, until his convoy was attacked outside Luhansk. Official reports claimed he died instantly, but the manifest said otherwise. Now, someone had leaked that document. Someone who wanted Karoline silenced before she connected the dots. She slipped the phone back into her pocket just as the cameras turned on again. Jimmy forced a smile. "Welcome back. We're talking with Karoline Leavitt. Where were we?" She smiled back. "We were talking about truths people aren't supposed to say out loud." Laughter was thin this time. Jimmy tried to steer things away from politics. "So, any White House holiday parties coming up? I hear the president can't dance." The audience gave a weak chuckle. But Karoline didn't play along. "There's something I want to show you," she said. "Something you might find interesting." Jimmy blinked. "Excuse me?" She pulled a folded envelope from her suit jacket. It was unmarked, plain, but the edge showed a red stripe, a government indicator for internal secure communication. Jimmy instinctively backed away. Whoa, what is that?" "I'm not going to read it out loud," she said calmly. "But inside is proof that someone inside a government agency has been passing information to media figures, specifically about our European gas diplomacy." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I didn't come here to play games, Jimmy," she said. "You made a joke about a deal that hasn't been publicized. That means someone wants to sabotage it. The question is, why?" The control room exploded into chaos. A senior director picked up a red emergency phone, the one only used when the network was under legal threat. "We need to cut the feed," someone shouted. but one of the assistant producers, a young woman named Elise, shook her head. Wait, look at this. She turned her laptop around. A live feed from an independent news blog was already streaming the full, unedited interview. They're rerouting the signal. Someone in our team is bouncing the satellite feed. Even if we cut the show, it's already out. The executive paled. Who's rerouting it? No one answered. Back on stage, Jimmy stared at Karoline, confused and angry. You're accusing people of... what? Treason? I'm saying there are lines, she replied, and someone crossed them. The air felt tight. The crowd was dead silent. Karoline slowly stood, envelope in hand, and looked directly into the camera. I won't be silenced, she said. The American people deserve better than scripted outrage and edited truth. She walked off set without waiting for permission. The screen faded again, but not to commercial, to black. For a moment, millions of viewers saw nothing. Then a single sentence appeared. The story you were about to watch has been temporarily suspended for further review. But it was too late. The avalanche had already begun. Karoline didn't wait for the car service the studio had arranged. Instead, she stepped out of the side exit into the cold Los Angeles night, heels clacking quickly on the pavement. Her breath showed in the air, though the adrenaline pumping through her veins made her feel like she was burning. The envelope was still in her coat, untouched. She didn't dare open it again in public. A black SUV turned the corner, slowing down. No headlights. She stiffened, but the back window rolled down, revealing Agent Margot Ellis, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses even at night. Get in, Margot said flatly. Karoline obeyed. The car pulled away just as two unmarked vans stopped near the studio's service entrance. Men in plain suits stepped out, scanning the alleyway. Too late. Inside the SUV, Margot spoke without turning her head. You weren't supposed to take that envelope with you. Karoline stared out the window. And Jimmy... Kimmel wasn't supposed to know what he knew. Margot sighed. He was being fed intel. Probably thought it was gossip. Late-night hosts aren't trained to handle this kind of weight. Karoline turned. You think it was accidental? I think someone used him to leak something sensitive, Margot replied. And you walked right into it. The car moved, through downtown, zigzagging deliberately to avoid tailing. Karoline opened her phone. Her feed was on fire. Tens of millions of views. Split reactions. Some praising her for exposing deep state games. Others mocking her as a drama queen. But one thing was clear. She had broken the pattern. And someone out there wasn't happy about it. Where are we going? She asked. Margot handed her a dossier. Langley wants to talk, and Zurich is off the table. Karoline opened the folder slowly. Inside were new documents, satellite images, an internal report marked compromised. A surveillance photo taken inside the Zurich security perimeter showed a man stepping out of a transport vehicle. He looked older, beard, different haircut, but the eyes were unmistakable. Julian Beckett, alive. Karoline whispered, How long have you known? Long enough to be afraid, Margot said. The photo had a timestamp, 3 days ago. But what sent Karoline's mind spiraling was the second image. Julian wasn't alone. The man beside him was Eero Mäkinen, a Finnish energy minister with alleged back-channel ties to Moscow. What are they doing in Zurich together? She asked. Margot said nothing. Karoline's phone buzzed again. A message from an encrypted app she hadn't used in over a year. The sender ID was just a red triangle. It's not about gas. It's about memory. She stared at it. What does that mean? She whispered. Margot, curious, leaned closer. Karoline didn't show her the message. She deleted it instead. Just then, the SUV screeched to a halt. 2 black cars blocked the road ahead. A van behind them sealed the exit. Margot shouted, "Buckle up!" Karoline barely had time to react before a flashbang exploded outside. The sound was deafening. Glass cracked. Gunmetal shadows moved on both sides. Karoline ducked down, pulling her coat over her head. "Out the left," Margot ordered, kicking open her door and pulling Karoline after her. They ran behind a dumpster. Gunshots echoed. A nearby window shattered, raining glass down on the pavement. Margot reached for her sidearm, firing once toward the van. A man in a gray hoodie dropped, rolling behind cover. Karoline clutched the envelope against her chest. "They want this." "They want what you know," Margot replied. "The envelope is just paper. But your head, that's the hard drive they can't erase." Suddenly, a different sound cut through the night. Rotors. A helicopter. Karoline looked up as a military-style chopper hovered above, searchlight scanning. "Reinforcements?" she asked. Margot hesitated. "I didn't call for air support." Karoline's heart pounded. Then her phone buzzed again. "Trust no one above the clouds." Margot grabbed Karoline's arm. "We're switching routes. We head for the safe house. We go dark." Karoline nodded, her mind racing. Everything was spiraling. From a comedy show to an international breach, from satire to survival. But deep inside, she knew one thing with burning certainty. Julian Beckett being alive changed everything. And someone, maybe more than one government, was willing to rewrite the rules of democracy itself to keep that buried. As they disappeared into the shadows, Karoline held the envelope tighter, not because of what was inside, but because of what it meant was about to begin. By sunrise, Karoline and Agent Margot were deep underground, literally. The safe house wasn't marked on any official U.S. government map. It looked like an abandoned rail station outside Alexandria, Virginia, covered in ivy and rot. But behind a rusted maintenance door was a biometric scanner and a reinforced steel passageway leading to an operations bunker that hadn't been used in a decade. The password to enter was a quote from the Federalist Papers. Inside, dim lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows over dusty desks and inactive monitors. Margot flipped switches. Generators came to life. One by one, screens blinked on. Karoline sat down heavily, the envelope now wrinkled in her hand. "Tell me everything you haven't said." Margot didn't look at her at first. She logged into a secure channel and inserted a metal drive into a terminal. Then she turned to Karoline with a look that stripped away her usual professionalism. "You're not just a target," she said. "You're the leak. Or at least, someone believes you are." Karoline blinked. "What? That's insane." "No, it's political," Margot said. "After what happened on Kimmel, factions within the intelligence community believe you were signaling someone. Maybe Julian. Maybe his handlers. You brought up those trade routes and the Baltic Sea gas lines out of nowhere. The way you deflected Jimmy's question. Some say it was code." "That's ridiculous," Karoline snapped. "I didn't know Julian was alive until 2 hours ago." "And yet," Margot said, pulling up surveillance footage from an old European embassy building. "You met with his former interpreter last year in Brussels. No formal record, no classified reason. But it happened." Karoline froze. "That meeting wasn't political," she said quietly. "It was personal." Margot stared. "You were involved?" Karoline hesitated. "I knew Julian before the plane crash." There it was, spoken out loud for the first time in years. Julian Beckett, former national security advisor, had supposedly died in a private jet explosion over the Atlantic during a NATO summit transfer. At the time, Karoline was still just a senior comms assistant. But what no one knew was that Julian had reached out to her weeks before his flight, warning her to stay away from a certain delegation involving Russian energy executives. She hadn't listened. She'd ignored it. and hours before the plane vanished, she'd received a voice message from him. "Karoline, if this goes wrong, you'll need to finish what I started." The voice note was deleted remotely from her device less than a minute after it arrived. Now she wondered, had someone been watching even then? "I was trying to protect him," she whispered. "And now he's alive. That changes everything." Margot's phone buzzed once. She opened the message. "Read it." Her face tightened. "What is it?" Carolina asked. Margot turned the screen toward her. "Urgent. NATO internal. Zurich summit compromised. Mackinnon, Beckett, and a third unknown met at 0300 hours. Signal interception suggests discussion of Article 5 manipulation protocol." Caroline's chest tightened. Article 5. The NATO clause that said, if one member was attacked, all members would respond. It had only ever been triggered once, in 2001 after 9/11. If someone was planning to stage an incident just to invoke it, they weren't talking about diplomacy anymore. They were talking about war. Karoline stood, her pulse pounding. "We need to go public." "No," Margot said immediately. "You do that, and every intelligence agency from London to Berlin will treat you as compromised. They'll think you're working with him." "But if we stay quiet," Karoline argued, "they'll move forward with the operation. They'll push the president to agree to full mobilization. That's why Kimmel was used, to bait me out, to isolate me." Suddenly, another message appeared on the monitor, this one flashing red. "Incoming encrypted call. Source, SIGINT Echo 7. Margot clicked accept. A voice crackled through. "You were warned, Miss Leavitt. Zurich is not the center, it's the decoy. The real hand is moving in Tallinn. You have 24 hours. The line went dead. Tallinn, Estonia. Margot looked shaken. "We don't have resources there. It's practically under constant cyber assault. You'd be blind." Karoline gritted her teeth. "Then we find someone who's not." She turned to the wall map, eyes scanning across northern Europe. Her finger landed on a small circle near the Baltic. "There's an old NSA outpost near Narva," she said. "It was part of Project Wavefront during the Cold War. They monitored Soviet subcable chatter. I studied it during my Georgetown thesis." Margot raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we break into a decommissioned signals bunker in a foreign country to uncover a secret plan to fabricate a NATO war trigger, while every agency thinks you're a traitor?" Karoline nodded slowly. "Yes." Margot chuckled dryly. "You really were Julian's favorite." Karoline turned, her expression steel. "I'm not here to honor him. I'm here to stop a war." Behind her, the monitor pinged again. A single file appeared. Memory Protocol, Beckett-01. She opened it, and saw the face of someone she never expected. The third man in Zurich. Not a Russian, not a European, an American senator, still in office. Everything froze. Now it wasn't just foreign games. It was betrayal at home. Karoline sat frozen in front of the screen. The photo stared back at her, grainy but unmistakable. Senator Douglas Trent, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, one of the most respected voices on international security, a man who had publicly called Julian Beckett a national hero after his death. Margot leaned over her shoulder. "That's not possible. Trent's clean. Too clean." Karoline shook her head. "That's the problem. He's been too clean for too long. No scandals. No leaks. He's always one step ahead." Margot nodded slowly, like someone who knows the playbook before the game even starts. Karoline stood up, heart pounding. "We're in deeper than we thought. If Trent is involved in this, then everything, Kimmel's setup, the Zurich meeting, even Julian's reappearance, was orchestrated to force a single outcome." Margot asked the question hanging in the air, A war? No, Karoline said, her voice cold. A realignment. She walked to the wall map again. Her finger hovered over Eastern Europe. Tallinn wasn't just about NATO. It's about reshaping alliances, forcing countries to choose sides before they're ready. And Trent's committee controls how military aid flows. If he flips the narrative, if he convinces the American people that an attack has happened, we're in it. All in. Margot leaned back. So what's the play? We break into an NSA ghost site, track a signal no one believes exists. And then, what? Send an anonymous tip to the New York Times? Karoline looked at her steady. We go to the one person who has a bigger stage than Kimmel, and who hates Trent even more. Margot's eyes widened. You mean? Yes, Karoline said. Senator Callum Ortiz. Callum Ortiz was a political firebrand, independent, brilliant, and unpredictable. He had clashed with Trent over everything from defense spending to surveillance reform. But most importantly, Ortiz had access to live broadcast channels through his weekly public hearings, which aired unfiltered on national television. But getting to Ortiz wouldn't be easy. After a failed assassination attempt 2 years ago, Ortiz lived under round-the-clock protection in an undisclosed compound outside Denver. No one visited without clearance from at least 3 agencies. I have a contact, Karoline said. Ortiz's former chief of staff. She runs a policy nonprofit now. If anyone can get us in quietly, it's her. Margot didn't look convinced. And if Ortiz turns you in instead, you're already branded suspicious by half the intelligence community. Then I'll burn with the truth, Karoline said. But I'm not letting Trent stage a war while Julian hides in the shadows and NATO sleeps. A sharp buzz from the console interrupted them. Incoming transcript. Source: Echo 7. Auto tag: subsea cable, Tallinn, Oslo. Timestamp: 0532 UTC. Stage 1 confirmed. Civilian infrastructure target designated. Scheduled blackout at 1900 hours. Attribution to be assigned: GRU proxy. Press leaks to begin 1 hour after detonation. Package delivery expected via diplomatic route. Karoline's eyes locked on the screen. They're planning to attack Estonian power infrastructure and blame it on Russian cyber units. And that, Margot said grimly, would be enough to justify triggering Article 5. The clock was ticking. Karoline grabbed her bag. We have 14 hours to get to Ortiz. Before they left, Margot opened a drawer and pulled out 2 burner phones and a sealed envelope marked with a Department of Energy seal. What's that? Karoline asked. Margot handed her the envelope. Insurance. Beckett gave it to me before. He vanished. Said to only open it if we were too late. Karoline stared at it, then slipped it into her coat pocket without opening it. They left the bunker, the heavy door sealing behind them. 4 hours later, inside a fortified compound on the edge of the Rockies, Senator Callum Ortiz stood at the window of his office, sipping black coffee, his phone vibrating with alerts from overseas intelligence partners. His aide entered. Sir, you have a visitor. Ortiz didn't turn around. Unless it's Karoline Leavitt with a nuclear bomb in her purse, tell them to come back next year. The aide hesitated. She says it's worse than that. Ortiz finally turned. Outside, Karoline and Margot waited, exhausted, cold, and holding the future of an entire continent in their hands. Ortiz opened the door himself. You've got 5 minutes before I call Homeland Security. Karoline stepped forward. I don't need 5. She handed him a hard drive. Play that, she said, and you'll understand why Beckett faked his death and why Senator Trent is trying to start a war. Ortiz stared at the drive. Then without a word he turned and plugged it in. The screen lit up, and the real story began. The video on the screen flickered for a moment. Then a grainy image appeared. A hidden surveillance feed from inside a private NATO security meeting in Tallinn, recorded 6 weeks ago. Karoline and Margot watched as Senator Trent leaned into a group of Eastern European delegates, speaking in a low voice. Julian Beckett sat nearby, hooded, clean-shaven, almost unrecognizable. His face was turned away from the camera, but the audio, carefully enhanced by NSA algorithms, was unmistakable. "We give them a reason," Trent said. "A cyber strike on civilian grid systems. No casualties, just chaos. Enough to push Article 5 into motion." One of the diplomats asked, "And if Moscow denies it?" "They will," Trent said. "But I already have assets in the press ready to drop proof from anonymous intelligence officials." Another diplomat interrupted, nervous. "This could spiral. Retaliation." Trent leaned closer. "Let it spiral. A new order is coming, gentlemen. But first, we burn the old one." The video paused. Senator Ortiz stood frozen. His face, usually animated with passion or wit, was pale and unreadable. He turned to Karoline slowly. "You're telling me this was recorded 6 weeks ago? That Julian Beckett was part of this?" Karoline nodded. "He infiltrated the operation, got deep enough to record this. But when he tried to leak it to domestic sources, he was cut off. That's why he faked his death. It was the only way to vanish clean." Ortiz exhaled, walking to the window. Outside, the first hints of sunrise lit the sky. "This changes everything," he said. "But if I bring this forward, Trent will go nuclear. He controls the Intelligence Oversight Committee. He'll accuse you of espionage, of fabricating foreign recordings." Margot stepped forward. "We have the original satellite hash. The timestamps match the undersea packet trace. We can verify its authenticity publicly, if you release it on live record." Ortiz turned, his eyes sharper now. "You're asking me to detonate a truth bomb that could fracture the entire NATO alliance. And you want me to do it without prep? Without protection?" Karoline met his gaze. "You were the one who said silence is the currency of tyrants." That line hit him hard. Ortiz had said it on the Senate floor 3 years ago, while opposing the Patriot Surveillance Renewal Act. Ortiz nodded slowly. "All right, but I want you on camera beside me. Both of you. When I hit play, you speak." Margot and Karoline exchanged a glance. There was no way back now. 2 hours later, the makeshift war room inside the Ortiz compound buzzed with tension. Journalists from 4 independent outlets had been summoned under a strict gag order. Live feeds were being tested, encryption tools verified. Ortiz stood at the center of the stage. Behind him, a giant screen displayed the U.S. flag and the words, "Truth Session, NATO, Secrets, and Consequences." A producer counted down from 10. At 0, the broadcast went live, unfiltered, unscripted, and uncensored. Ortiz looked directly into the camera. "For years we've been told who the enemy is. But what if the real danger isn't outside our borders, but inside the very institutions sworn to protect us?" He stepped aside. Karoline took the mic, visibly steady. "Last night, I was thrown off national television for defending the truth. Tonight, I will finish what I started." She pressed a button. The recording of Senator Trent began to play. Viewers across America, and soon across the world, watched, stunned, as the conversation revealed itself. Strategy meetings to incite conflict, manipulation of press channels, and betrayal at the highest levels. Social media exploded. Trent leak and Beckett alive began trending within minutes. Meanwhile, inside the White House Situation Room, the president's national security advisor stared at the screen in disbelief. "This was never authorized," she said. "Trent acted on his own." One of the aides turned. "Should we confirm or deny?" "Neither," she said. "Not yet. First, find Beckett." Somewhere in rural Austria, Julian Beckett stood at a gas station, watching the live stream from a cracked iPhone. As Karoline's face appeared, He smiled faintly. "She did it," he whispered. But just as he turned to leave, a black SUV pulled up behind him. 2 men stepped out. They didn't look like locals. Julian dropped the phone, bolted into the trees. The game wasn't over. Not yet. Snow crunched beneath Julian Beckett's boots as he moved through the Austrian woods, breath clouding in the cold morning air. He could hear the footsteps behind him, calculated, coordinated. Whoever had sent these men, they weren't amateurs. He ducked behind a fallen pine, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a tiny transmitter the size of a coin. With a single press, it sent out a ping, encrypted and geotagged, straight to Karoline's private satellite link. It was a risk. But if they were going to take him, someone had to know where. In Washington, the fallout from the leak had already begun. Senator Trent's office released a hurried statement calling the footage deep-fake propaganda designed to destabilize American unity. He demanded an immediate investigation into foreign interference and accused Karoline Leavitt of treasonous collusion. But the damage was done. NATO partners began withdrawing from scheduled operations. European intelligence agencies confirmed the presence of American cyber activity in their internal systems. Within 12 hours, the EU called an emergency session. By nightfall, Trent had gone dark. No statements, no appearances, and, notably, no sign of his security detail. At a small safe house in rural Virginia, Karoline stood with Ortiz and Margot, watching Beckett's signal blink on a secure screen. "He's still alive," Margot said, "but they're closing in." Karoline's phone buzzed. It was an incoming call from number unknown. She answered. A voice she hadn't heard in over a year spoke calmly. "You've done enough. Now walk away." Karoline froze. It was former National Security Director Elias Reed, a man who vanished after whistleblowing a decade-old rendition scandal. He'd been presumed dead. "You're behind this?" she asked. "I'm behind stopping what Trent began. But you've exposed too much, too fast," Reed said. "They're not just coming for Beckett. They're coming for all of you." Ortiz leaned in. "What does that mean?" Reed's voice darkened. "It means the people behind Trent aren't elected. They're not bound by borders or party lines. They operate through think tanks, private contracts, and black budgets. You didn't burn one man. You set fire to a machine." There was silence. Karoline finally said, "Then we burn it all the way down." An hour later, Ortiz stepped onto the Senate floor for an emergency midnight session. The chamber was only half full, but the media broadcasted live. He carried a sealed envelope, handed to him earlier by a courier sent from Margot. Inside was a list: names, dates, fund transfers, proof of covert programs authorized outside congressional oversight. Ortiz held it up. "We were told to fear foreign powers, but the real architects of collapse are here, using our own laws as shields." He named names, departments, shell companies, former directors, current donors. The room erupted. The feed was cut after 5 minutes. Outside, protests gathered, some in support, some against. But the country was no longer watching passively. They were awake now. At dawn, Karoline received another message, just one line. Extraction failed. Beckett captured. Being moved east. She stared at the message, heart pounding. "Where east?" Margot asked. Karoline opened her laptop, pulling up satellite feeds. "If he's being moved," she said, "we'll intercept them at the border." Ortiz stared at her. "You're not CIA. You're not even in office anymore." "I'm not doing this for politics," she replied. "I'm doing it because truth shouldn't cost someone their life." He nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." 12 hours later, on a snow-covered road near the Hungarian border, a black convoy moved slowly through the fog. What the guards didn't know was that their comms had been jammed. their tires marked with tiny GPS tags, and that 3 minutes from now, a drone operated from a NATO watchdog facility in Germany would disable the lead engine. When the van jolted to a stop, Julian Beckett looked up, bruised but breathing. The side doors burst open. Karoline stood, there, covered in snow, a pistol in one hand, defiance in her eyes. "Time to go," she said. Beckett blinked in disbelief. "You came all the way for this?" She smiled faintly. "You said we were playing a long game. I just didn't realize." "How long?" In the days that followed, more leaks came. From Reed, from Beckett, from hidden files Margot had buried in digital vaults across 3 continents. The machine Trent built began to collapse. Public hearings followed. Arrests were made. Karoline was subpoenaed twice, and each time walked in with the truth and walked out with a standing ovation. One journalist called it the Civil Cold War. But for Karoline, it was simple. Truth had a cost, and she had paid it, willingly. The screen faded to black. A final caption appeared. "The battle isn't over. It just changed hands."